Hello, fellow nerds. Thank you so much for joining us for this next episode of our No Nerds podcast. Joining us today, we have Ava Birch, Kat,
Hi.
and Dwayne Karen. And we are going to chat about
And
all the,
you?
oh, and me, Angela CIE. And today we're going to chat about all the things that we wished we had known because we had done wrong when we first started out, and we would like you to learn from our mistakes. So I know Kat has an excellent one to start us off. So Kat, how about you share your first experience?
I would love to. I'm going to start with the ruler base plate. always put that on. I was doing some hand guiding and I missed a little section. And I was like, I'm not going to put it back on for this one little spot, right? So I sewed to the ruler and bent the needle bar. So that was a costly and mistake. So don't do that. Always put your ruler base plate on.
Yeah, that sounds like sound advice. It's so quick for that just to kind of slide under there, right?
Yep. And of course, I was holding the ruler at like a weird angle since the plate wasn't on there, and that did not help. So,
Right. As a hand guider, Ava, have you ever run into that problem or has that happened to you accidentally?
Accidentally sewing across a ruler? Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I took a corner out of a ruler. I was rushing.
Oh,
Mm.
we're always trying to get
Yeah,
it
but
done, eh?
nothing bad happened, though it startled me more than anything else other than it nicked the ruler. But getting back to what Kat was saying, I've done that many times. If I forgot a spot, doing hand guided, I would put the ruler base plate on, and because that's an easy way to have a sturdy surface to just add stitching in a small area. So if you do it correctly, that's a great way.
To get the job done. Dwayne, what is something that you wish you had known when you had first started out?
The first thing that comes to mind is we have a client that uses a lot of minky backs. And when I first started, I would always pull my quilt tops too tight, which especially with minky, if you pull minky too tight, it just scrunches up after you're done and just makes a horrible looking job. So I learned not to pull the minky tight at all to quilt it as loose as I possibly could when you're using minky on the back.
Right.
So the Mickey was on the back, not the top.
Yeah, the minky was on the back.
I've done that. The very first time I used Mickey, of course, I was fortunate that it was my own quilt, but been there, done that.
Well, even like
and
non-minky stuff, right? When I first started out, I was pulling everything too tight because I was like, this is amazing. I can have it pin straight. I can have it perfect. And then I was always having tension issues and I couldn't figure it out. They weren't actually tension issues with my thread tension and all that. It was just my sandwich was just too tight. And so as soon as you back it off a little bit, I wish I had known that. Um, it just looks beautiful. There was nothing wrong with my bobbin tension. There was nothing wrong with my intermittent tension. It just was too tight.
and that's especially true also for batik fabrics. A lot of people say, I don't like quilting with batik on the back, and it's literally because of the tight weave that you have to loosen the tension on your quilt sandwich, and it works out great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I believe that the looser you can comfortably, like your comfort level, that you can comfortably stitch a quilt, I think that the quality of your stitching is so much nicer.
Right. Do you guys have advice for that? Like, I know when I was teaching in class, I kind of show them, I call it burping. So I pull the top one up as, until it doesn't turn anymore. And then I take the dog latch and I back it up 2 teeth. and that seems to be kind of my comfortable zone for looseness. Do you guys have any advice like that?
I find that for a lot of people, it's literally personal preference, what they feel comfortable with. Because as you mentioned earlier, we're taught to keep everything straight, obviously. And so in our mindset, we think that means pulling it tight, the quilt sandwich.
Right.
When in reality, and I think that's where when we educate people, it's important to explain to them what actually the needle has to do in order to build a beautiful stitch and how hard it needs to struggle the tighter your sandwich is. And so therefore, I think we can deter people's mindset by really taking the time to explain, what is really happening when we're quilting.
Right.
So, but still people will, they were taught a certain way and often they have a really hard time, straying from that because they think it's the only way.
Right. Yeah.
I agree. And like one of the things that I always do is the whole, we teach this on tour when put your fingers underneath the quilt and you should be able to pull the quilt top off of your fingers. I do that. And then sometimes I'll make it just a smidgen looser than that as well. Like, I don't know, I just like mine just a smidgen looser.
Yep. It's exactly what Duane said. Whatever comfort is, for sure. Ava, what did you wish you had known? You made a mistake and wished you had known when you were first starting out.
Well, funny you should ask. So I quilt for others, and I wished I had known, which I did, but I was rushing, and so I didn't properly measure when I loaded my quilt. And
Mm.
I'm doing an edge to edge on this quilt and come to the bottom, and I'm short. And unfortunately, it was quite directional.
Oh, shoot.
So I literally had to take all the stitching out. And
Oh,
it's not that I didn't know. The lesson is, don't forget those steps that, are so important.
yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you can fix it, if it's not directional by adding fabric to the end, but that was not an option there. So take your time. Don't think because you've been doing this for 20 years, you can get lax and forget.
It's an interesting, very interesting point because I quilt for customers as well, I got lax with a particular customer. She always knew how much I needed extra and all that stuff. And so I just took in her quilts and I didn't measure them anymore because I'd been quilting for her so often. And I put one on and lo and behold, the back was too short because I mean, we're all human, right? So she's human too and just didn't think and didn't measure completely, and so yeah, I was lucky though, Ava. I was able to add some fabric. It wasn't directional, it was a nice plain backing, but let me tell you, I measure now every single time I put it on before I put it on. Yeah, I felt like I had just kind of got lucky in that instance. So Kat, do you have any other sage advice?
So one time the needle alignment magnet, you put that on your needle, get it all perfect, and then you take it off and you put it back in its little resting spot. I forgot to put it back in the little resting spot and started quilting.
Okay.
So I got lucky in that it like jammed the hopping foot. I mean, the needle was trash, but it jammed the hopping foot. And so at that time, all we had to do was realign the hopping foot and fix the timing. I didn't bend the needle bar that time, but pretty much if like, yeah, you can break the needle bar or the needle, I've done it.
You have the
You're
costly,
trying to
the
rush and you
costly
don't follow the steps.
yeah. You must have some excellent advice being tech things that you might have seen on the road that people do often or something that you've done
That's
that
a
you
good
know.
Um,
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what would be the most prominent thing that I see wrong on the road. Most of the time, it's like the hopping foot is not gripping the quilt top well enough. And what actually has to happen is the hopping foot needs to come down and grip the quilt top and carry the quilt top with it while it's stitching, while the stitcher completes the stitch. So the hopping foot has to come down and grip the quilt top. That's the main thing that usually we have issues with, especially with hand guiders, or hand guided machine, not hand guiders so much, is
Mhm.
that the machine's really just not set up quite right.
Right.
Did we
And
all
so
turn and stare at Ava when he said hand
yeah.
guiding? Ava has an extensive hand guiding background.
So that if that's occurring, that's kind of the stitching doesn't look appropriate, right? Is that where you get your railroading
Yeah,
or
or what else will happen is that if the hopping foot's not gripping the quilt top, then what's happening is the needle is bending as it's coming down to take the stitch. The needle is bending like that as it is advancing. And what will happen is you'll get skip stitches because eventually, if it's going in the right direction, it'll bend away from the hook, and you'll start getting skip stitches.
okay. Perfect. That's great. How about you, Ava? Do you have any sage advice for so they learn from our mistakes?
From your mistakes, so far I haven't heard a lot from you, Angela. You
Oh my
must be
gosh.
perfect.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've done them too. Let me tell you. I think one of the first ones I did was I got too excited about starting out with Creative Studio and didn't really kind of have a good concept of some of the draw functions and that kind of thing and some of the features. And I had this quilt. Luckily, it was for a friend, and she said, "Go ahead, practice." And I was so excited, I couldn't wait. And I just thought Phil was like the next best thing to slice bread. And so it was kind of like a big star quilt with a bunch of little diamonds. So I had like isolated out each diamond and I wanted to put a pattern in each of them. And I just pressed fill the entire time because like look at how cool it is like staying within each of those diamonds without actually knowing how fill worked travel pathwise. So I was watching it stitch and I was like, oh gosh, is this really what Phil does? Like there's like 12 lines of stitching in the same space. And I was like, well, I guess. And I didn't know any better, so I finished it that way. When I took the quilt off of the frame, it weighed about 100 pounds more than when I put it on because there was so much thread in it. So I wish somebody had said, slow down. Like slow down and get to know it and don't get too excited. Because Phil is fabulous. I love Phil. I use it all the time now. I'm not dissing Phil. But I just like now that I know how to use it and when it's best to be used, would have saved me a lot of headache. So yeah. So
Well,
slow
one of the things when I got my Statler and was trying to learn this thing on my own, you know, if you're a hand guider for many years, you have a general idea how you can fill a space. Well, when I was learning using the Statler, the biggest aha moment many months in my journey was no, I don't have to take a pattern, bring it over into my block, fiddle with handles and nodes. There's such a thing as pattern to boundary. And wow, you know, I mean, that probably was my biggest thing because I had spent hours, you know, fitting these. And I thought, why would people buy this thing, right? Because it's just so time consuming. I could have finished this quilt by now. The lesson was that you really, have to get a good understanding
down.
um, of just the basic things initially, and when it clicks. And yeah, that's why people buy these machines, because it just will be efficient. And that's why I love teaching the computerized classes now, based on my experiences that were slow coming, to get people to have being able to miss all those steps, right?
Yeah.
And get right into and without the frustration. I think that's the main thing. A lot of time when people don't take advantage of the education, they're trying to do it themselves using random resources, because there's so many out there. They're not always the correct ones based on where you're looking.
Yeah.
And so, they don't get into those aha moments very quickly. So that's why I love what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I think, like you said, Ava, there is a lot of resources out there, but sometimes also it's nice because we learn differently, and what clicks with one of us might not click with the other, but it's just taught in a different way, right? And there's so many ways in Creative Studio to do the exact same thing. And so you have all these wonderful options, and your brain works differently sometimes on how we think about it. So they're out there. So don't get too frustrated. You just might need to find the direction that speaks best to you and that you understand in order to get the job done. So
Yeah.
yeah, wonderful. Dwayne, Kat, any last minute advice, Ava?
Oh, I agree with what you guys said about just kind of take it slow, take a deep breath. You can always look in the manual. I made the same mistake with Phil myself. It was my own quilt, luckily, skeleton, and it went around and around and around and around the skeleton. I was like, oh, and bless her heart, my mother-in-law was here and she unstitched it for me. And I was like, oh, you're the best lady ever. So then, yeah. So I learned that one the hard way too. So read the
Right.
manual.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And don't quilt anything you're not, or don't, if I can offer you any advice in dealing with customers, I think the biggest piece is don't present something you're not willing to actually do. Um, so, know your own level, know your abilities, and just show them what you can do, because often they're really impressed with just about anything. So don't overcomplicate it so that you have a successful experience and they'll love the result. How about you guys with customers? I think we all quilt for customers, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
excellent advice.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other advice in dealing with customer intake?
Oh, customer intake is going to be our next episode.
Oh, well,
Don't
I'm
jump
jumping
ahead.
ahead. Well, then that's an excellent segue to the next
Yes.
episode. So perhaps we will leave you here and wanting more. Thank you all for joining us today again. And Ava, Kat, Dwayne, it was a pleasure. And we can't wait to see you on the next episode of No Nerds.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thanks.
everybody. Bye.